It was supposed to be the warmest night of the year, the one night where even broken families set aside their differences for the sake of Christmas. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies, candles flickered against frosted windows, and children's laughter filled the air. I sat quietly at the end of the long dining table, my hands folded in my lap, trying to believe, just for a moment, that I still belonged there. But before my fork could touch the plate, my daughter's voice pierced the air like a blade. "You didn't contribute, so you don't eat." Every sound in the room collapsed into silence. Glasses froze midway to lips, knives and forks stopped clinking, and every pair of eyes turned toward me. My daughter Natalie didn't lower her voice. She wanted them all to hear. The neighbors she had invited, the cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years, even the church deacon sitting near the head of the table, they all stared as though I were a thief caught red-handed, trying to steal food I had no right to. Humiliation flushed my face hot, though the room felt suddenly cold. I glanced at Sophie, my 9-year-old granddaughter, whose mouth fell open in shock. Liam, only 6, tilted his head in confusion, a cookie crumbling between his small fingers. Ethan, my son-in-law, leaned back in his chair with a smirk, swirling his wine as if this cruelty were entertainment. I wished I could melt into the shadows beneath the glowing Christmas tree. Its branches sparkled with ornaments I had bought years ago, when Natalie still clung to my hand and begged me to let her place the star on top. Now she stood over me, her arms crossed, her chin lifted, using those same ornaments as the backdrop for my shame. My name is Patricia. I am 67 years old, a widow, and a mother who thought she had given her only daughter everything. After my husband Henry died, I sold my modest little house in New Jersey and moved here to Boston to live with Natalie. I believed she needed me. I believed we would take care of each other. I gave her $200,000 to pay for college. I helped with the down payment on this very house, and I poured every ounce of love I had left into her children. And yet, on Christmas Eve, under the glow of 100 twinkling lights, she looked at me not as a mother, but as a burden, an old wallet that had run dry. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. Sophie's small voice broke the silence. "Why can't Grandma eat?" she asked, her words trembling in the still air. The room held its breath. I could feel Sophie's innocent gaze burning into her mother, searching for an answer that might make sense of the cruelty she had just witnessed. Natalie's lips curled into a cold smile. "She's learning responsibility." The words rang louder than any laughter or song could have. My stomach clenched, but not from hunger. It was the ache of betrayal, heavier than any weight I had carried before. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some bowing their heads toward their plates, others pretending to cut into their food as though silence could erase what they had heard. But nothing could erase it. Not from me, not from Sophie, and not from the neighbors who would whisper about it for months to come. I had imagined Christmas differently. I thought of the pearls I had wrapped for Natalie, the little dolls I had chosen for Sophie, the toy trains I had picked out for Liam. I thought of the tiny Christmas tree in my upstairs room, decorated with ribbons I had saved from Henry's last holiday with us. I had imagined joy, gratitude, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, I was served shame like a main course, cold and raw. Ethan leaned closer to Natalie and chuckled under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. My daughter basked in her moment of power, her arms folded across her chest, her shoulders squared. She didn't hide the satisfaction in her eyes as she watched me lower my hands from the table and retreat into silence. I sat there, frozen, the world around me fading into the clatter of plates and the false cheer of voices trying to stitch the evening back together. But no amount of carols or candlelight could cover the truth. My own daughter had chosen to strip me of dignity in front of family, neighbors, and strangers alike. The turkey, golden and steaming, was carved and passed around, but not to me. Sweet pies were sliced, the scent of cinnamon filling the air, but no plate was set before me. My hunger was nothing compared to the hollow ache spreading through my chest. I could not taste the food, but I could taste the bitter truth. I looked again at Sophie. Her eyes brimmed with confusion and sadness, silently pleading with me to protest, to demand what was fair. But how could I explain to her that sometimes the cruelty of those closest to us leaves us speechless? Liam reached across with his small cookie, trying to hand it to me, but Natalie's sharp glare cut him down, and he dropped it back onto his plate, cheeks flushing with shame. I forced a smile for the children, though inside I was breaking. I would not let them see me crumble completely. But that night, as I sat surrounded by laughter that no longer included me, something inside me cracked open. Humiliation had been forced upon me before in small, private ways, but never like this. Never on display, never so public, never so intentional. The lights above the table shimmered, reflecting off the glasses, casting a glow that felt more like interrogation lamps than festive joy. My daughter had staged this scene, and I was her unwilling actor, the old fool to be mocked in her theater of pride. I lowered my gaze to the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered holly leaves with my trembling fingers. And in that moment of silence, as the world around me moved on without me, a thought pressed itself into my heart. This would be the last Christmas I ever spent begging for a seat at my own daughter's table. I didn't sleep that night. While the guests downstairs sang carols and clinked glasses, I sat alone in my upstairs room, staring at the little Christmas tree I had decorated with ribbons Henry once saved for me. Each light blinked weakly, as though even the tree knew it no longer belonged in this house. My heart ached, not just from hunger, but from the heavy truth pressing down on me. How did we get here? How did I become a stranger in my daughter's home, the woman I once believed would never let me fall? After Henry passed away, the silence of our New Jersey home became unbearable. I remember lying in bed, clutching the side where he used to sleep, listening to the hollow creak of the pipes and the wind seeping through the old wooden windows. Natalie had called then, her voice sweet as honey. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone. Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." Those words felt like salvation. I sold the house Henry and I had built our life in, packed away decades of memories into boxes, and gave the realtor the keys. I told myself it was a new chapter, a chance to be closer to my daughter and grandchildren. I even gave Natalie part of the money, $200,000, to help her pay off her student loans. Later, when she and Ethan wanted this big house in Boston, I dipped into the savings Henry left and covered the down payment. I didn't hesitate. It felt right. That's what family does, I thought. We lift each other when we can, but gratitude fades faster than snow in the sun. When I arrived with my suitcases and the little cedar chest Henry had built for me, I was welcomed with smiles. Natalie told the neighbors, "Mom's here now, isn't it wonderful?" Sophie and Liam rushed to hug me, their little arms wrapping around my waist. Ethan shook my hand firmly, like a man welcoming an honored guest. For a moment, I believed I was wanted. For a moment, I believed I was home. It didn't take long for reality to show itself. Natalie began with small requests. "Mom, since you're home during the day, could you handle the laundry?" "Mom, the kids need dinner earlier. Could you cook something light for them?" I agreed happily. What else would I do with my time? I thought helping would make me useful. But the requests turned into demands. Soon, I was scrubbing floors, ironing Ethan's shirts, picking up toys, and watching the children from sunrise to sunset, while Natalie attended yoga classes, and Ethan scrolled endlessly on his phone. Then came the talk about contributions. Natalie sat me down at the kitchen table one morning and said, "Mom, you live here rent-free. Don't you think it's fair if you help with expenses? Even just your pension check, what is it, $1,400 a month?" I stared at her across the table, the same girl I once held in my arms through storms and fevers. She wanted my pension. I handed it over without a fight, convincing myself it was only temporary. "Family shares," I told myself. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something had shifted. I was no longer mother. I was income. Still, I clung to hope. When Christmas approached that first year, I saved from what little was left after giving Natalie my check. I bought Sophie a dollhouse with pink shutters, Liam a wooden train set, and Natalie a strand of pearls, simple elegant, the kind Henry once said every woman should own. On Christmas morning, I presented them proudly. Sophie squealed with joy, Liam hugged his train, and even Natalie smiled as she clasped the pearls around her neck. For a moment, I thought we had turned a corner. But gratitude, as I've learned, is a fragile thing. By the next year, the pearls were tucked in the bottom of a drawer, forgotten. Sophie's dollhouse gathered dust in the basement. Liam's trains lay broken under the couch. And I, who had once been the provider, was reduced to silence at a dinner table where my presence was tolerated but never cherished. This Christmas, I had hoped it would be different. I had spent weeks knitting sweaters for the children, baking cookies from Henry's old recipe, and even saving enough to buy Natalie a small brooch shaped like a snowflake. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would see me again, not as a burden, not as a pension check, but as her mother. Instead, she turned me into a spectacle. As I replayed her words in my head, "You didn't contribute, so you don't eat," I realized she had planned this. She had invited the neighbors, the cousins, even the deacon, not just to celebrate Christmas, but to witness my humiliation. She wanted them to see me diminished, powerless, irrelevant. She wanted them to know she was the one in control now. I looked down at the little tree in my room. Its lights flickered faintly, casting shadows that reminded me of Henry's smile. He had always told me, "Never let anyone take your dignity, Pat. Money comes and goes, but dignity, once lost, is gone forever." At the time, I never imagined those words would be tested by my own daughter. The truth was undeniable. I had given Natalie everything: education, money, a home, my time, my love, and in return, she had given me scorn. My chest tightened as I pulled the brooch from its small velvet box. I had wrapped it with care, tying the ribbon twice so it would look beautiful under the tree. But now, it felt like a cruel joke. No gift could bridge the chasm that had opened between us. No sacrifice could fill her endless hunger for more. The pearls I once gave her flashed in my mind, those pearls that should have been a symbol of love. Now, they were nothing more than beads around the neck of someone who saw me as disposable. I wondered if she even remembered where they came from. I sat there until the candles burned low, my body trembling from the weight of everything I had lost. I wasn't just denied food that night. I was denied recognition as a mother, denied respect as a woman, denied dignity as a human being. And yet, as the house grew quiet and the guests went home, a strange calm settled over me. I knew something had ended that night, but I also sensed something beginning. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask, what if I walked away? What if I stopped giving, stopped begging, stopped waiting for her approval? That thought lingered, sharp and dangerous, as the last light of my little tree flickered out. The morning after Christmas, the house looked as though nothing had happened. Wrapping paper lay scattered on the floor, crumbs dotted the table, and the faint scent of turkey still clung to the air. But inside me, nothing felt the same. I was hollow, stripped of dignity, yet strangely alert, as though some deep part of me had been shaken awake. Still, I went through the motions. I set the kettle to boil, folded napkins, cleared plates. I told myself it was just another day, though every movement felt heavier, slower, as if my body carried the weight of a truth I couldn't put down. By afternoon, the family gathered again in the dining room to eat leftovers. The tree twinkled with the same colored lights, music played softly on the radio, and yet a tension lingered like smoke no one acknowledged. I tried to keep my head low, hoping the night before had been enough cruelty to satisfy my daughter for one season. But Natalie wasn't finished. As I reached for a slice of turkey, just a small piece barely enough to taste, her hand shot out and blocked mine. "Not again, Mom," she said, her voice sharp, cold, carrying across the table. The chatter died instantly. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes glittering with amusement. Liam stared at his plate, pushing peas around with his fork. Sophie froze, her little hand halfway to her mouth, as though she couldn't believe this was happening all over again. "You didn't contribute yesterday," Natalie continued, her tone louder now, deliberate. "So today you don't eat either. Do you understand?" Her words sliced through the room, cutting deeper than the carving knife had through the turkey. I sat motionless, my hand trembling above my lap. Ethan chuckled, a cruel, low sound. "She's right, Pat. Responsibility. Everyone needs to carry their weight." He raised his glass to his lips, smirking as though it were all a joke. My cheeks burned. I wanted to shout, to remind them of the money I had given, the hours I had spent raising their children, the years of love I had poured into this family. But my throat locked. The shame pressed down heavier than the hunger gnawing inside me. It was Sophie who spoke for me. "Why can't Grandma eat?" she asked again, her small voice trembling in the silence. Her wide eyes turned from me to her mother, pleading for an answer that would make sense. Natalie's expression hardened. She didn't flinch, didn't soften. "Because she hasn't contributed," she said, each word slow, deliberate, dripping with disdain. "She needs to learn that nothing in life is free." The words echoed in my ears. I had given her life, given her everything I could, and yet to her I was nothing but a leech. The neighbors shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat awkwardly. Another reached for the cranberry sauce, pretending not to hear. But they all had. The humiliation was complete, public, undeniable. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. Tears welled in her eyes. "That's not fair," she whispered, looking back at me, then at her mother. She's not like that." "Eat your food," Natalie snapped. "This is an adult matter." But it wasn't. It was cruelty so sharp even a child could see it. I pressed my hands together tightly, trying to keep them from shaking. Every part of me screamed to run, to leave, to hide. Yet I sat there, swallowing the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to cry in front of them. Crying would have been victory for Natalie, proof that she had broken me. Then Liam, sweet Liam, slid something across the table. A single sugar cookie, its sprinkles smudged, half broken from being gripped in his small hand. He pushed it toward me carefully, eyes wide and innocent. "Here, Grandma," he whispered. For a moment, my heart lifted. But before I could reach for it, Natalie's hand shot out. She snatched the cookie, crushed it in her fist, and dropped the crumbs back onto Liam's plate. "She doesn't need pity," she hissed, glaring at her son. Liam's lip trembled. He lowered his head, tears pooling in his eyes as he stared at the ruined cookie. My chest cracked open at the sight. She hadn't just taken from me. She had taken from him, too. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared speak. Even Ethan avoided my gaze, though his smirk remained. Inside, something shifted. The humiliation that had weighed me down hardened into something else. A flicker of anger, a spark of resolve. For the first time, I saw my daughter not as the child I once rocked to sleep, but as the woman she had chosen to become, cold, ungrateful, cruel. I rose from the table slowly, my chair scraping against the wooden floor. My hands no longer trembled. I didn't look at Natalie, or Ethan, or even the neighbors who sat frozen in awkward silence. I looked only at Sophie and Liam. Their eyes followed me, wide and fearful, as if they sensed this moment meant more than any of us could say. Without a word, I turned and walked away, up the stairs into my room, closing the door behind me. The sound of laughter resumed downstairs, forced and hollow. But I no longer cared. Something had cracked open inside me, and once open, it could not be closed again. For years I had told myself that love meant sacrifice, that family meant giving until you had nothing left. But Christmas Eve and Christmas Day had shown me the truth. To Natalie, I would never be a mother again. I would only ever be a burden. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I stopped being their burden? What if I reclaimed what was mine, my dignity, my voice, my life? The thought lingered like a flame in the dark, small but impossible to put out. I closed the bedroom door gently behind me, careful not to let the latch click too loud. Downstairs, voices rose and fell, laughter stitched back together as if my absence had restored the balance of their evening. For them, the show could go on without the old woman in the corner. For me, it was the end of something I had clung to for too long. The small Christmas tree in my room still glowed faintly, its lights blinking against the shadows. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, remembering how I had decorated it only days before. Each ribbon, each ornament carried a memory. Sophie had helped hang the silver bells, her little fingers fumbling with the hooks. Liam had insisted on placing the star on top, though it leaned slightly to the side. To me, it had been perfect. But now, in the quiet after humiliation, the tree seemed like a mockery of the joy I thought I could build here. I pressed my palms together and took a long breath. The sting of Natalie's words still echoed in my chest. You didn't contribute, so you don't eat. But it was the look in Sophie's eyes, the crushed cookie in Liam's small hand, that tore me apart. She had humiliated me, yes, but worse, she had forced her children to watch, to choose silence in the face of cruelty. A faint knock rattled against my door. Before I could answer, it opened just enough for a tiny figure to slip through. Liam stood there, his pajamas rumpled, clutching something behind his back. His eyes darted toward the hallway, as though he were afraid of being caught. "Grandma," he whispered, tiptoeing in, "I brought you this." From behind his back, he pulled a cookie, round, a little cracked, decorated with uneven sprinkles. He held it out proudly, his small hands trembling with both excitement and fear. I cupped his hand gently, lowering myself to meet his eyes. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't—" "She doesn't have to know," he said quickly, glancing at the door. His innocence was like sunlight breaking through clouds. In that moment, he wasn't just offering me a cookie. He was offering me kindness, defiance, the kind of love no one could buy or steal. Tears welled in my eyes as I took the cookie, pressing it carefully between my fingers. I wanted to savor this small act of rebellion. But before I could even thank him, the door flew open. Natalie stood there, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light. Her eyes landed on Liam first, then on the cookie in my hand. Her mouth tightened. "Liam," she snapped, "what are you doing here?" He froze, shoulders stiff, the courage draining from his small body. "She was hungry," he whispered. Natalie strode forward, snatched the cookie from my hand, and crushed it in her fist. The crumbs scattered across the carpet like snow. "She doesn't need pity," she hissed, glaring at me before turning to her son. "And you don't sneak around behind my back. Go to bed." Liam's lip trembled, but he obeyed, scurrying past her with his head bowed. My chest ached watching him disappear down the hall, his tiny footsteps fading. Natalie lingered, her arms crossed. "Don't undermine me, Mom. If you want respect in this house, you'll earn it. Until then, stop turning my children against me." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving me alone in the dim glow of the tree. For a moment, I sat frozen, crumbs still clinging to my palm. My daughter's cruelty had burned before, but now it scorched deeper, because she hadn't just crushed me, she had crushed the spirit of her own child. I closed my fist around the crumbs, feeling their powdery edges dig into my skin, and something inside me hardened. I rose and walked to the window. Outside, snow drifted across the yard, soft and silent, covering everything in white. The houses on the street glowed with warm lights, families gathering inside, sharing food, laughter, love. I thought of Henry, of the way he used to clear the driveway with his old shovel, humming carols under his breath. I thought of the nights we sat by the fire, his arm around me, reminding me that no matter what storms came, we had each other. "Never let them take your dignity," he had said. The words returned like an echo from the grave, steadier than my own heartbeat. I turned back to the little tree. Its lights blinked stubbornly, refusing to die even in the darkness. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass ornaments, and I hardly recognized myself. My face was lined, my shoulders stooped, but behind my eyes, something new flickered, something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. I would not let Natalie decide who I was. I would not let her strip me of respect. She could take the food from my plate, the pension from my pocket, even the gifts from under the tree. But she could not take my dignity unless I handed it to her willingly, and I was done handing it over. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The humiliation had broken something. Yes, but in its place, something else was being built. I didn't know what the days ahead would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not sit at that table again, begging for scraps of kindness from my own child. The cookie crumbs still lingered on the carpet by morning, a small, silent reminder. Liam had tried. He had seen me, even when his mother refused, and in that gesture, I saw the truth. There was still love in this house, but it no longer belonged to Natalie. I belonged to myself, and for the first time in years, I felt the faint stir of a plan taking shape. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing out the thin strands of my gray hair, and I could hardly recognize the woman staring back at me. My eyes looked older than they should have, not just from age, but from the weight of years spent giving, and giving, until there was nothing left for myself. The humiliation of Christmas Eve and Christmas Day had cracked something open, but it also forced me to look back at how I had gotten here. It hadn't started with one cruel sentence at the dinner table. No, this had been building for years. 3 years ago, when I first moved into Natalie's house, I thought it would be temporary. Henry had only been gone a few months, and the silence of our New Jersey home was unbearable. I remember packing my things while my neighbor Clara stood in the doorway, urging me not to sell too quickly. But Natalie's voice on the phone was warm, persuasive. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone. Come live with us. It'll be good for the kids. They need their grandma." So I signed the papers, sold the house Henry and I had saved every dime to buy, and carried my cedar chest, his last gift to me, into Natalie's guest room. I thought it would be a new beginning. Instead, it became the slow unraveling of everything I thought family meant. At first, Natalie was sweet. She thanked me for helping with Sophie's school tuition. She hugged me when I handed her the envelope of cash for their mortgage. Ethan smiled politely when I cooked dinner, and the children were always excited to have me around. But gratitude has an expiration date, and theirs was short-lived. Soon, Natalie began to say things like, "Mom, since you're here, it makes sense for you to chip in." It sounded harmless, until chip in became handing over my entire pension check every month, $1,400. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need much, but each time I signed it over, I felt Henry's voice in my heart, warning me that I was letting go of more than money. The chores piled up too. I became the unpaid housekeeper, the nanny, the cook, the laundress. I was up before dawn making oatmeal, folding laundry by noon, scrubbing floors by evening. Ethan would lounge in the living room scrolling on his phone. Natalie would breeze in and out with shopping bags or spa appointments, and I would be left with the work. When I hesitated, Natalie would sigh and say, "Mom, you don't want us to think you're just freeloading, do you?" Freeloading. The word stung every time, and yet I stayed. I told myself it was better than being alone. I told myself I was helping. I told myself family meant sacrifice. But not all sacrifices are noble. Some are just exploitation. I remembered one evening clearly. Ethan had lost his job, and for 2 years he lived off my pension and the savings Henry left me. We sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out, and Ethan muttered, "Good thing your mom's got a check coming in, Nat." He didn't even look at me when he said it, as if I were nothing more than an ATM machine that happened to cook dinner too. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, Henry's words echoing in my mind. "Never let them take your dignity, Pat." I whispered back into the dark, "I won't." But deep down, I knew I already had. It was around that time I made a quiet decision. I called Mr. Harrington, the lawyer who had handled Henry's affairs. I remember sitting across from him in his office, my hands trembling as I clutched my purse. "Mrs. Turner," he said gently, "your husband was clear. He wanted you to be secure. He left you more than enough to live comfortably. You don't have to give it all away." I nodded, ashamed. "But I have, or most of it, to Natalie." His expression tightened, but he didn't scold me. Instead, he opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. Henry prepared a contingency, a revised will and trust, in case circumstances required protection. We can activate it if you wish. It will ensure your daughter cannot take everything. It even allows for a trust fund for your grandchildren." I stared at the papers, overwhelmed. I wasn't ready then. I still believed Natalie's harshness was temporary, that she would see my sacrifices and soften. So I asked Mr. Harrington to hold on to the documents, just in case. "Keep them safe," I whispered, my voice cracking. "But don't tell her. Not yet." He placed the folder back into his safe, nodded firmly, and promised, "They'll be here when you're ready." And so I carried that secret with me, tucked deep inside my heart, a lifeline I prayed I would never need. But sitting in my room now, crumbs still scattered from the cookie Natalie crushed, I realized Henry had seen further than I did. He had known the day might come when even my own daughter would turn against me. He had left me a way out, a way to preserve my dignity. For 3 years, I had endured the slow burn of being used, of being dismissed, of being turned into nothing more than a burden. But Christmas had stripped away my illusions. There was no gratitude left in Natalie, only hunger, for money, for control, for power. And as I stared at the little Christmas tree, its lights flickering stubbornly against the dark, I knew the time had come. The will, the trust, the papers I had once tucked away, they weren't just in case anymore. They were my only chance to reclaim what was left of me. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence, "Henry, I'm ready now. The days after Christmas dragged on in silence. Natalie avoided me except when she wanted something done. Ethan muttered under his breath when I passed by, as though the very sight of me irritated him. Even Sophie and Liam seemed quieter, weighed down by the tension they didn't fully understand. I busied myself with chores, folding laundry, sweeping the floors, cooking dinners that often went untouched by the adults. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of the house, I sensed something had shifted. There was an edge in Natalie's voice, a constant whispering with Ethan behind closed doors. They would lower their voices when I entered, then smile too brightly, as though the air itself wasn't thick with secrets. One afternoon, Natalie left for the market. Ethan dozed on the couch, half-empty beer bottles scattered around him. The children played upstairs. I should have taken the chance to rest. Instead, something pulled me toward Natalie's office. The door was cracked open. Inside, her laptop sat on the desk, glowing faintly, a notification blinking in the corner. My heart raced as I stepped closer. I shouldn't. I knew that. But a voice in me whispered, "You already know what you'll find. You just need to see it with your own eyes." I sat down carefully, glancing once at the door before pressing the keys. To my surprise, there was no complicated password, only a birth date. Sophie's, the date of her firstborn daughter. My hands trembled as the screen opened, email after email spilling before me. At first it was nothing. Grocery receipts, messages from the PTA, online shopping orders. Then I saw it. A thread of emails between Natalie and a name I hadn't seen in years. Victor, my son, her older brother. The subject line read, "Mom's Situation." I clicked. Natalie's words stared back at me, cold and calculated. "It's getting harder to manage her. She's stubborn, and she refuses to admit she's a burden. We can't keep covering her expenses forever. I'm thinking it's time we place her in Maplewood, $450 a month for a shared room. Once she's there, we can sell the rest of her belongings. It's the practical choice." Maplewood. I knew the name. It was a nursing facility on the other side of town. Cheap, crowded, the kind of place where people were parked in wheelchairs by windows, forgotten. My hands shook as I scrolled. Victor's reply came quickly. "Agreed. She'll fight it, of course, but once she's admitted, she won't have much say. Ethan's on board?" Natalie had written back, "Yes, he knows it's for the best. Once she's out of the house, we'll have room to refinance. Plus, there are still things in her cedar chest worth money. We can handle the sale quietly. She won't even notice." I pressed a hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. The cedar chest, Henry's chest, the one thing I had brought from our home in New Jersey. Inside were our wedding photos, his watch, the letters he had written me during the war, and they wanted to sell it like it was a yard sale trinket. I scrolled further, bile rising in my throat. Natalie had even attached a list: furniture, jewelry, mom's keepsakes, estimate $5,000. She had priced out my life, reduced decades of memories to a ledger. I sat there in stunned silence, the glow of the screen burning into my eyes. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was planning not just to humiliate me, but to erase me. A sound from the hallway jolted me. Ethan shifted on the couch, muttering in his sleep. I closed the laptop quickly, my heart thundering, but not before forwarding the entire thread to myself. My hands were clumsy, but desperation made them steady enough. I sent the emails to a private address I had once set up for bills, one Natalie didn't know existed. When the screen confirmed the message had been sent, I logged out and stood, pressing a hand to the desk to keep my knees from buckling. I stared around the office, Natalie's framed diplomas, the family photos without me in them, the neat shelves of books she never read, and felt a cold certainty settle over me. There was no misunderstanding, no exaggeration. Natalie wanted me gone. Ethan wanted me gone, and Victor, my son, the boy I once nursed through scarlet fever, the boy I sent to college with Henry's savings, was in on it too. The betrayal was complete. I moved quietly back to my room, my body trembling, my mind racing. I closed the door and leaned against it, the air thick in my lungs. For a long time I stared at the cedar chest. I imagined Natalie pawing through it, selling Henry's watch for pennies, tossing our photographs into the trash. Rage surged hot through my veins, but beneath the rage was something sharper: clarity. For years, I had been their servant, their checkbook, their doormat. I had let them take and take, convincing myself that love was sacrifice. But love without respect is nothing more than chains. I walked to the window, the snow outside falling steady and quiet. It blanketed the world in white, pure and unbroken, as if reminding me that life could be wiped clean, started again. Natalie thought she held all the power. She thought I was too weak, too dependent, too old to resist. But she didn't know about the will. She didn't know about Mr. Harrington. She didn't know that Henry had prepared for this, that I had already planted seeds for the day I would need to reclaim my dignity. And now, with her own words saved safely in my possession, I had proof. I placed my hand on the cedar chest, whispering to Henry, "They won't take this from me. Not this time." And for the first time in years, I felt a strength rise in me, steady and unshakable. Natalie thought she had written the script for my ending. She didn't know I was about to rewrite it. I sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like hours, the glow of the little Christmas tree flickering weakly beside me. My hands still trembled from what I had seen on Natalie's laptop. The words burned in my mind. Maplewood, $450 a month. Sell her belongings. My daughter had priced me out of my own life. My son had agreed. And Ethan, the man who once promised Henry at our wedding reception that he would always look after Natalie, was nothing more than an accomplice. For a long time I felt numb, too stunned even for tears. The betrayal was so complete, so deliberate, that it hollowed me out. But slowly, as the night deepened and the house settled into silence, something else began to rise in me. Not despair, not even rage, resolve. I walked to the cedar chest and knelt in front of it, running my fingers over the worn wood. Henry's hands had built this chest. Inside were his letters, his watch, the last photo of us smiling in front of the Jersey shore before the cancer took him. These were not items to sell. They were my life, my proof that I had lived and loved and given everything I could. Natalie thought she could erase me, but she had no idea that Henry had left me the tools to fight back. I remembered sitting in Mr. Harrington's office years ago, the way he slid the papers across the desk, telling me Henry had insisted on protections. I hadn't been ready then. I had clung to hope that my children would honor me, that love would be enough. But love without respect is not love. It is servitude, and I was done serving. My fingers closed around the phone on my nightstand. For a moment, I hesitated. Who could I call? Who would understand? Then one name came to me, steady and sure. Clara. Clara had been my friend since high school. We had walked through each other's milestones, weddings, births, funerals. She was there when Henry died, bringing me soup, sitting in silence when there were no words left. If anyone could remind me that I was not invisible, it was her. I dialed her number, my hand shaking slightly as the line rang. It was late, but she picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and alert. "Pat, are you all right?" The question broke something in me. Tears filled my eyes, but my voice came out steady. "Clara, I need to get out. I can't stay here anymore." She didn't hesitate. "Then come. You know my house is always open. You can stay as long as you need. I'll drive there tomorrow if I have to." I swallowed hard, relief washing over me. "Thank you. I don't even know where to begin." "You begin by walking away," she said firmly. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, not after everything you've already given." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. After we hung up, I sat quietly, clutching the phone to my chest. Henry's voice came back to me, strong as ever. "Never let them take your dignity, Pat." "Heidi." "I won't," I whispered into the dark. "Not anymore." I stood and began gathering what little I would take. Not much, just clothes, my photographs, Henry's watch, the letters, and the envelope I had hidden carefully in the cedar chest. The envelope Mr. Harrington had given me years ago. The revised will and trust Henry had prepared. My hand lingered on it, feeling its weight. This was my weapon, my shield, my proof that I wasn't powerless. I slid it into my bag, my heart pounding. The house creaked around me, the quiet broken only by Ethan's snores downstairs. Natalie's door was shut, no doubt dreaming of a future without me in it. But that future was about to crumble. I looked once more at the little Christmas tree. Its lights blinked stubbornly, refusing to go out no matter how long they had been burning, just like me. For years I had let Natalie dictate the terms of my life. For years I had mistaken obligation for love, but not anymore. I had decided. I would not let them send me to Maplewood. I would not let them sell Henry's watch or my letters. I would not hand over another dollar or another ounce of myself. Tomorrow I would walk out of this house, and when I did, I would take back everything they thought I had surrendered. I closed my bag, zipped it tight, and placed it by the door. My chest felt lighter, though the fear of what was coming gnawed at me. Leaving would not be easy. Natalie would rage, Ethan would sneer, Victor would write his cold, calculating emails. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, I was making a choice for myself. I turned off the lamp, let the little tree cast its faint glow, and lay down. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it was not filled with nightmares. It was filled with Henry's smile, Clara's voice, and the quiet certainty that I had finally remembered who I was. The morning I left, the sky was pale gray, the kind that promised snow by evening. The house was still, blanketed in the silence of a late winter dawn. Ethan's snores drifted from the living room couch. Natalie's door was closed. No doubt she was still tangled in her silk sheets, sleeping soundly after another night of wine and whispered conversations with Victor. I moved slowly, deliberately. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, not from doubt, but from the weight of what it meant. For years I had been rooted to this place by loyalty, by obligation, by the memory of love. Today I would walk out untethered. I packed only what mattered. A small suitcase with a few clothes, the box of letters Henry had written me during the war, tied with faded ribbon. His watch, the face cracked but still ticking softly. A framed photo of Sophie and Liam from their first Christmas, when their eyes sparkled with innocence and trust. And tucked safely into the lining of my purse, the envelope Mr. Harrington had given me, the revised will and trust, my lifeline, my shield. Before leaving my room, I placed a single folded sheet of paper on the desk, the letter I had written the night before, in careful, steady handwriting. Natalie, I have given you more than money. I have given you my life. I deserve respect, not charity. I will not be treated as a burden or erased from my own family. Do not look for me until you learn what respect means. Mother. The words weren't angry. They weren't desperate. They were truth, written without apology. I slipped the strap of my bag over my shoulder and opened the door. The hallway stretched long and quiet. My heart thudded against my ribs as I moved, but no one stirred. Downstairs, the Christmas decorations still glimmered faintly. Wrapping paper littered the floor, tinsel hung crooked on the railing, and the faint scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. The remnants of a holiday that had turned to ash. At the base of the stairs, I paused. The cedar chest stood there, closed tight. I placed a hand on its lid, whispering softly, "I'll come back for you. I promise." Then I turned away. I reached for the front door, my hand tightening around the knob. That was when I heard it, a soft rustle behind me. "Grandma?" Sophie stood in the hallway, her hair mussed from sleep, her pajama top hanging loose over her shoulders. She rubbed her eyes, then blinked at the suitcase in my hand. "Where are you going?" she whispered. My heart clenched. For a moment I wanted to drop everything and scoop her into my arms, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not for her, not for Liam, not for anyone. Staying meant erasure. Leaving meant survival. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, Grandma has to go for a little while." "Why?" Her lip trembled. "Because sometimes," I said carefully, "when people forget how to treat you right, you have to remind them. You have to step away until they remember." She frowned, not fully understanding, but I saw the spark of worry in her eyes. She leaned closer and whispered, "Will you come back?" I kissed her forehead. "One day. But until then, remember this. Grandma loves you. Always." Before she could speak again, I pressed a finger gently to her lips, urging her to silence. "Don't wake your parents. This is our little secret." She nodded slowly, clutching her stuffed rabbit tight against her chest. I straightened, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me sharp, but it tasted like freedom. Snow crunched under my shoes as I walked down the path, my suitcase rattling softly behind me. The neighborhood was quiet, houses glowing faintly with early morning light. For years, I had walked these streets carrying groceries, pushing strollers, chasing after children. Now I walked them carrying only myself. At the corner, Clara's car idled, exhaust rising in white puffs against the gray sky. She stepped out as soon as she saw me, her scarf pulled tight around her neck. "Pat!" she called softly, rushing to take the suitcase from my hand. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though my throat tightened. "I am now." She hugged me tightly, her arms strong and steady. "You're safe. You're with me now." I sank into her embrace, the warmth of true friendship wrapping around me like a shield. As we loaded the suitcase into her trunk, I glanced back at the house one last time. Its windows glowed faintly with the warmth of a home, but I knew better. That house was no home. It was a stage where my daughter had played the role of gracious hostess, while turning me into the villain of her story. But the script had changed. I slid into Clara's car, pulling the door shut. The seatbelt clicked, the engine hummed, and as we drove away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was nothing more than a shadow. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Whether Natalie would rage, whether Ethan would threaten, whether Victor would send another cold email. But I knew this much. I was no longer trapped. I had the envelope. I had my dignity. I had myself. And as the snow began to fall heavier, blurring the streets behind us, I whispered into the quiet of the car, "Henry, I did it. I walked away." Clara reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes never leaving the road. "And now," she said softly, "we begin again." The ride to Providence was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills the air when two people know words won't be enough. Clara drove steadily, her scarf tucked tight, her eyes fixed on the road as snowflakes fell thick and fast against the windshield. I sat beside her, my hands folded around the envelope in my purse, my heart beating like a drum. Every bump in the road felt like a reminder. I was leaving one life behind and stepping into another. By the time we reached her house, the morning had stretched into a gray, heavy afternoon. Clara ushered me inside, her little home warm with the smell of cinnamon tea. She took my coat, set my suitcase down by the sofa, and said simply, "Rest. You're safe here." But I couldn't rest. Not yet. The weight of what I had seen on Natalie's laptop pressed too heavily on my chest. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was practical, calculated, cruel. They wanted me gone, erased, shut away in Maplewood, while they divided up the remains of my life. I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if Henry himself had pressed his hand upon it, reminding me of his words. "Never let them take your dignity, Pat," Clara noticed. She sat down across from me, her eyes sharp, steady. "What's in there?" "My way back," I whispered. And the very next morning, I made the call. Mr. Harrington answered on the second ring, his voice calm and measured. "Mrs. Turner, it's been some time." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking, "but I think it's finally time." There was no hesitation. "Come in this afternoon. We'll make everything official." Clara drove me to his office, a small brick building tucked between a bakery and a bank. Snow had piled against the steps, but inside it was warm, the air filled with the faint smell of leather and old paper. Mr. Harrington rose as I entered, extending his hand warmly. His hair had gone grayer since I last saw him, but his eyes were the same, clear, kind, and unwavering. And, "Patricia," he said gently, guiding me to a chair, "you look tired, but I also see something new in you, determination." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the envelope. "I can't live like this anymore. I found proof. Emails between Natalie and Victor. They plan to send me to Maplewood, to sell Henry's things, to erase me." He frowned, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not surprised. Henry was cautious. He asked me to prepare for the possibility that gratitude might fade." I slid the envelope across his desk. "I think it's time." He opened it carefully, laying out the documents, the revised will, the trust fund, the clauses Henry had insisted upon. His finger traced the signatures at the bottom, his and Henry's, and then he looked up at me. "This document," he said, "removes Natalie as a beneficiary. She will have no claim to the estate. Instead, all assets, your home, your savings, and the $1.2 million estate Henry secured, remain under your control. Furthermore, it establishes a trust for your grandchildren to be accessed when they are of age. This way, they are protected, even if their parents are not." Tears pricked my eyes. Henry thought of everything. "He did," Harrington said softly, "and now, so must you. Once we file this, it cannot be undone. Natalie will have no legal access to your assets, your accounts, or your home." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on his shelf. Then I nodded firmly. "Do it." Harrington slid the papers toward me, along with a pen. My hand trembled as I signed, not from fear, but from the weight of freedom pressing against my chest. With each stroke of the pen, I felt years of humiliation lifting, layer by layer, like chains falling away. When I finished, Harrington gathered the papers and sealed them. "It's done. I'll file everything with the court this week. By law, Natalie is removed as a beneficiary. She no longer has access to your accounts, your estate, or your deed. You are the sole owner of everything Henry left." I exhaled, the breath shuddering from deep inside me. Relief flooded my body, sharper than any hunger I had ever felt. For the first time in years, I wasn't at their mercy. "There's one more thing," Harrington said, reaching into his drawer. He handed me a small folder. "These are your banking authorizations. I recommend you revoke any joint access Natalie may have. Freeze her out completely." I nodded. "Yes, lock everything. She will never use my name again." By the time we finished, dusk had fallen. Snow swirled outside the window, coating the world in white. Clara waited in the lobby, her knitting needles clicking softly, a patient smile on her face. When I stepped out, she looked up and asked simply, "Well?" "It's done," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "She can't touch me anymore, or Henry's legacy, or the children's future." Clara squeezed my hand. "Then you've already won." We drove back in silence, but this silence was different. Not heavy with shame, not hollow with fear. This was the silence of resolve, the calm that comes after you've taken back what was yours all along. That night, as I lay in Clara's guest bed, I stared at the ceiling and let the peace settle over me. I thought of Natalie's face when she would discover her access cut off, when her calls would go unanswered, when her control would crumble. But more than that, I thought of Sophie and Liam, of the trust fund waiting for them, untouched by their parents' greed, of the day they would learn that their grandmother had not abandoned them, but had fought for them in silence. Henry's words echoed one last time before sleep took me. Never let them take your dignity. The first phone call came early the next morning. I was sitting at Clara's kitchen table, sipping tea, when my cell phone lit up with Natalie's name. I let it ring until it went silent. A minute later it rang again. Then again. By noon, the screen showed 12 missed calls. By evening, 28. Each one was like a drumbeat, frantic, desperate. But I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what had happened. Natalie must have opened the letter I left behind. She must have gone to the bank, smug and confident, expecting to withdraw money as always, only to find the account locked, her access revoked. I could almost see her face as the teller shook her head, as her card was declined, as she realized the lifeline she had drained dry had been severed. The calls came in bursts. Sometimes her voice on the voicemail was angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes cold as ice. "Mom, what have you done? Pick up the phone. This isn't funny. You can't do this to me, to the kids. If you don't answer, I swear." I deleted each message without listening to the end. For years, her voice had dictated my every move, not anymore. By the second day, Ethan's voice joined hers. His tone was sharper, meaner, laced with threats. "You're destroying this family. You think you can just walk away? Answer the damn phone, old woman." I pressed delete again, my hands steady. The fear that once paralyzed me was gone. They could rage all they wanted. They no longer had the power to touch me. Still, I imagined the chaos unfolding in that house. Natalie pacing the living room, clutching her phone, her pearls glinting in the light as if mocking her. Ethan slamming his fist against the counter, shattering glasses in his fury. Sophie and Liam huddled together upstairs, confused and frightened by the storm brewing below. I thought of Sophie's wide eyes when she saw me leave, of her whispered question, "Will you come back?" I prayed she would one day understand that all of this, every painful step, was for her and Liam, for their future, untouched by their parents' greed. On the third day, Clara and I walked to the post office. The snow had hardened into ice along the sidewalks, crunching beneath our boots. Inside, I rented a small P.O. box in my own name. A simple thing, but it felt monumental. A place that was mine, beyond Natalie's reach. When we returned, Clara set a plate of muffins on the table and shook her head. "She's unraveling, isn't she?" I nodded. "And she's only just begun." That evening the phone rang again. This time I let it play on speaker while Clara and I sat together. Natalie's voice cracked with panic. "Mom, the mortgage is due. Ethan tried to pay the bills and everything's frozen. Do you understand? We can't access anything. You can't just leave us like this. I'm your daughter." Clara snorted softly. Now she remembers that. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Natalie's own words, those emails to Victor, were louder in my memory than her pleading now. She hadn't seen me as her mother when she plotted Maplewood. She hadn't remembered I was her mother when she crushed Liam's cookie in front of me. She remembered only now, when the money was gone. The next day, a neighbor called Clara. She had seen Ethan in the driveway, slamming the hood of his car, shouting at Natalie. "She can't do this to us," he had bellowed, his voice echoing down the street. "She's nothing without us." But the truth was clear. They were nothing without me. That night, as I prepared for bed in Clara's guest room, I checked my email. A new message blinked in my inbox. From Victor. "Mother, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is reckless. Natalie says you've cut her off. She has children to care for. If you don't undo this, we will have no choice but to take further steps. Maplewood was for your own good. You're making a mistake." I read it twice, the coldness of his words settling into my bones. My son. The boy who once clung to my hand at his first piano recital, whose tears I wiped when he scraped his knee, whose future Henry and I sacrificed everything to build. And now he wrote to me like I was a stranger, a problem to be solved. I closed the email, my jaw tight. "Further steps," he said. Let him try. They had already underestimated me once. They wouldn't get the chance again. Clara knocked gently on the door. "You all right?" I looked up, my voice steady. "I am. For the first time in years, I truly am." She smiled, stepping in with 2 mugs of tea. "Then let them scream. Let them call. Let them pound their fists. You've already won." I sipped the tea, its warmth seeping through me. She was right. The storm was only beginning, but the tide had already turned. As I lay down that night, the phone buzzed again on the nightstand, Natalie's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring until it fell silent, then turned it face down. It was the 4th evening since I left, and Clara's house had begun to feel like a shelter I never knew I needed. The air smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish. The fire crackled in the small living room, and for once, I slept without fear that someone might barge into my room demanding more. But peace never lasts long when those who feed on you are starving. The knock came just after dusk. Hard, fast, urgent. Clara froze mid-stitch, her knitting needles dangling. We exchanged a glance. My chest tightened. I moved to the window and peeked out. There they were, Natalie standing in the driveway, hair disheveled, coat thrown over her shoulders. Her face was pale, frantic, but her eyes burned with determination. And beside her, clutching their jackets, were Sophie and Liam. My breath caught. She had brought the children. Clara rose from her chair, her face tightening. "Pat, you don't have to answer." But I knew I would. Not by opening the door, not yet, but by facing her on my own terms. The pounding grew louder. "Mom!" Natalie's voice cracked through the wood. "Mom, open the door." Clara put a hand on my arm. "Don't let her pull you back in." I straightened, my voice low but steady. "I won't." I walked to the balcony on the 2nd floor and opened the glass door. The winter air hit me sharp, but I stood tall, looking down at the woman who used to curl against my chest when thunderstorms frightened her. She looked up, eyes wild. "Mom, please, we need to talk." Sophie clutched her stuffed rabbit, her little face pale in the cold. Liam tugged at her sleeve, whispering something I couldn't hear. "Mom!" Natalie shouted again, her voice breaking. "You're hurting the kids. Do you understand? They're suffering. We can't pay the bills. Ethan's furious. Please, come home." I held the railing, the metal icy beneath my palms. "Come home? You mean come back to being your wallet, your maid, your scapegoat?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. "You didn't call me your mother when you said I was a burden," I continued, my voice carrying into the night. "You didn't remember I was your mother when you told strangers I hadn't contributed. You didn't think of me as your mother when you planned to lock me away in Maplewood." Her eyes widened. "What? I saw the emails, Natalie." My voice cut through her protest. "The ones you sent Victor, about Maplewood, about selling my belongings, about erasing me." For the first time, she faltered. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a child caught in a lie. "Mom, Don't!" I snapped. My voice echoed louder than I expected, steadier than I felt. Don't you dare pretend this was kindness. Don't you dare stand there and say this was for my good. You wanted me gone so you could have my house, my money, my life, and you dragged Ethan and Victor into it like scavengers circling a body that wasn't even cold yet." Her voice cracked, desperate. "It's not like that." "Then tell Sophie why you crushed the cookie Liam tried to give me," I interrupted, my words slicing clean through her excuses. "Tell them why you told their grandmother she couldn't eat because she hadn't contributed." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Sophie's eyes widened, filling with tears as she looked up at her mother. Liam clung to her sleeve, his small body trembling. Natalie's shoulders slumped, her mouth trembling. She tried to reach for the children, but Sophie pulled back, hiding her face against Liam's shoulder. The sight pierced me, but I didn't waver. "Go home, Natalie," I said, my voice low, final. "Go back to your husband, to your empty house filled with bills you can't pay. When you're ready to remember what respect means, then maybe you can call. But until then, I want nothing more from you. Not your pleas, not your lies, not your shame." Her mouth twisted, fury flashing in her eyes, but she didn't move. She stood frozen in the driveway, the snow falling around her, her children clinging to each other at her side. Clara stepped onto the porch below me, her voice sharp and cutting. "You heard her. Leave." Natalie's eyes flicked between us, her breath fogging in the cold. For a moment I thought she would scream, hurl insults, demand I come down. But instead, she turned on her heel, grabbing Sophie's arm too tightly. Liam stumbled after them, his little boots crunching in the snow. They disappeared into the night, their car engine growling before fading into silence. I stayed on the balcony long after they were gone, my chest heaving, my hands gripping the railing until my knuckles ached. Below me, the snow lay untouched except for the small footprints of two children who deserved far better than the parents they had been given. Clara climbed the stairs and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to." I nodded slowly, my throat tight. "She'll never forgive me." "Maybe not," Clara said gently. "But you didn't need her forgiveness. You needed your freedom." I looked out into the dark, the flakes swirling like sparks in the night, and whispered to myself, "And I've finally taken it." The night after Natalie came to Clara's house, the air was heavy with unease. Snow had piled high against the windows, muting the world outside, but inside, my heart refused to rest. I replayed her voice over and over, the desperate pleas, the fury in her eyes when I named Maplewood aloud. I had stood firm, but the storm wasn't over. I knew Natalie, and I knew Ethan. Rage was always their next weapon. Clara brewed tea and set it beside me. "You handled yourself well," she said softly, "but it won't end there." She was right. It happened 2 nights later. The first sign was the crunch of tires on the icy driveway. Clara frowned, peeking through the curtains. "It's late. Who—" She stopped. Her mouth tightened. I joined her, my stomach sinking. A black SUV had pulled up, its headlights blazing against the snow. The engine cut off and the driver's door swung open. Ethan stepped out, stumbling slightly, a bottle in one hand. Even from the window, I could see the flush on his cheeks, the unsteady sway in his step. "Pat!" Clara's hand tightened on my arm. "Stay inside." The pounding on the front door rattled the walls. "Open up!" Ethan's voice slurred but loud, carrying through the winter air. "Old hag, come out here!" Clara moved quickly, locking the door, sliding the chain across. My heart thudded, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was the man who had lived in my house for years, lounging on my furniture, eating meals I cooked, draining accounts I funded. And now, drunk and furious, he had come to claim what he thought was still his. The pounding grew louder. "You think you can run from us? You think you can just take everything?" He kicked the door hard, the wood groaning under the impact. "Come out, Patricia. You're nothing without us. Nothing." Clara grabbed the phone. "I'm calling the police." I put a hand on hers, steady. "Do it. But let me speak first." The chain held as Ethan pounded again, his voice rising into a roar. "Selfish old hag! After all we did for you, you leave us to starve? Open this damn door before I break it down." I stepped closer, my voice loud and clear through the wood. "Ethan, you will not scare me anymore." There was a pause, then a low, mocking laugh. "You think you've won? You think you're clever running to your little friend? You belong in Maplewood, Patricia. That's where you belong, a bed by the window drooling in your soup." The words hit hard, but they no longer pierced. They only revealed the emptiness behind his fury. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "I know everything, the emails, the plans, the way you and Natalie conspired to erase me. But you failed. The accounts are locked. The will has changed. You have no power left here." The silence on the other side was short-lived. Then came another crash, his boot against the door. "You're lying!" he shouted. "Natalie told me you're bluffing!" "You think you can take what's ours?" Clara pressed the phone to her ear, her voice sharp. "This is Providence Police. We need an officer immediately. Drunk man, threatening, trying to break in." Ethan's rage grew louder, incoherent curses spilling into the night. "You're done, old woman. You hear me? Done!" Blue lights appeared down the street sooner than I expected, reflecting off the snow. Ethan's voice faltered as the sirens wailed closer. He stepped back, but the officers were already there, their flashlights cutting through the dark. "Sir, step away from the door," one of them barked. For a moment, Ethan raised his hands, the bottle still dangling loosely. "She owes us," he slurred, pointing at the house. "She's my wife's mother. She's supposed to take care of us." The officer moved quickly, taking the bottle from his hand. "That's enough. You need to leave." Ethan tried to argue, but his words fell into a drunken jumble. The officers walked him back to his SUV, speaking firmly, their lights flashing across the snow. I watched from the window, my heart pounding, but not from fear, from release. For the first time, Ethan's mask had slipped in front of the world. No polite smile, no feigned gratitude, just raw entitlement and fury, exposed under flashing blue lights. Clara set the phone down, exhaling. "They'll let him off with a warning," she muttered. "But at least he won't dare come back tonight." I nodded, though my hands still trembled. He showed his true self. That's enough for now. We watched as the SUV pulled away, the taillights glowing red against the snow before vanishing into the night. Silence returned, but it was different this time. Sharper, heavier, filled with the knowledge that the line had been crossed. I sank into the chair by the fire, my breath unsteady. Clara sat beside me, placing her warm hand over mine. "You see," she said softly, "they can't hurt you anymore. Their anger is proof they're losing." Her words soothed me, but I knew the battle wasn't finished. Natalie and Ethan wouldn't stop with drunken threats. They had too much pride, too much greed. They would fight harder, claw deeper. But I had something they didn't: truth. And the law was finally on my side. That night, I lay awake in Clara's guest room, the glow of the fire dying down to embers. Ethan's words echoed in my ears. "You belong in Maplewood." For years I might have believed him. For years I might have cowered. But now I whispered into the dark, "No, I belong where dignity lives, and that is not with you." The decision was already forming in my mind. It was time to face Natalie, not in driveways, not in drunken rants, but in the place where truth had weight, in front of the law. The day of the meeting arrived bitterly cold. The streets of Providence glittered with frost, and the air stung my lungs with every breath. Clara insisted on coming with me, her presence steady beside me as we stepped into Mr. Harrington's office. The waiting room smelled of old leather and polished wood, the kind of place where truth carried weight. I sat down in the conference room, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The envelope with the printed emails rested in my purse, their words ready to cut through Natalie's lies like a blade. Across the table, Harrington shuffled documents, his expression unreadable but firm. "We'll keep this professional," he said gently. "But I want you prepared. Your daughter won't come quietly." I nodded. "I've lived through her storms. I can weather one more." The door opened. Natalie swept in first, her coat lined with fur, her heels striking the floor sharply. Behind her, Ethan followed, his jaw tight, his eyes bloodshot. They looked every bit the polished couple, until you caught the cracks in their armor. "Mom," Natalie began with false warmth, her smile tight, "this is unnecessary. We're family. We shouldn't be in some lawyer's office airing dirty laundry." "Then perhaps you shouldn't have written it down," I said calmly. Her smile faltered. Ethan leaned forward, his voice dripping disdain. "You think you can just cut us off? After all the years we let you live with us, all the money we covered for you?" I raised my hand, steady. "Enough. I came here for the truth, not for your fiction." Harrington cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Turner has enacted the revised will and trust prepared by her late husband. All authority and assets remain solely under her control. Your names, Mr. and Mrs. Reed, have been removed from any claim." Natalie's face drained of color. She reached for the folder, flipping through the documents with trembling hands. "This can't be right. You can't just erase me. I'm her daughter." "Daughter," I repeated softly, "and yet you wrote this." I pulled the printed emails from my purse and laid them on the table. Harrington adjusted his glasses as Natalie's eyes widened. She reached out as if to snatch them away, but I held them firmly, sliding them toward her instead. "Read it," I said. Her lips moved, whispering the words she already knew by heart. Maplewood. Sell her belongings. Practical choice. Her hand shook as the pages crinkled beneath her fingers. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his voice rising. "This means nothing. Families discuss options. You're twisting this." I met his glare with calm steel. Families don't plan to sell their mother's belongings while she's still alive. Families don't scheme to lock her away like an inconvenience. That wasn't a discussion. That was a betrayal. The room fell silent except for the hum of the old clock on Harrington's wall. Natalie's eyes darted from the papers to me, her voice breaking. "Mom, I was under stress. Bills, kids, Ethan losing work. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice didn't waver. "I gave you everything. My savings, my time, my love. And when the money stopped, so did your respect. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You crushed Liam's gift. You told Sophie I didn't deserve to eat because I hadn't contributed. Don't you dare stand there and say I don't understand." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Sophie's face flashed in my mind, her wide, tear-filled eyes in the driveway. I pressed forward, my voice stronger. "You wanted me erased, Natalie, but today it's your name that disappears. Not from my memory. I'll always remember what you did, but from the deed, from the will, from the future you thought you owned." Harrington closed the folder with finality. "It is official. The estate, valued at $1.2 million, remains in Patricia Turner's name. A trust has been created for her grandchildren, Sophie and Liam, to ensure their protection. You, Natalie Reed, and you, Ethan Reed, have no legal claim." The words landed like a gavel. Natalie's face twisted, fury and despair battling for dominance. Ethan slammed his fist against the table, rising half out of his chair. "This isn't over." Harrington's voice was sharp, firm. "Sit down, Mr. Reed. It is over, in every legal sense that matters. If you continue to threaten or harass Mrs. Turner, I will involve law enforcement directly." Ethan froze, his jaw clenching, before sinking back into his chair. Natalie covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. I sat tall, my voice quiet but unwavering. "I am not your burden. I am not your wallet. I am not your prisoner. I am your mother, Natalie. And the only inheritance I demand is respect. Since you could not give me that, you will have nothing else." The silence that followed was suffocating, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I held the power. Natalie lowered her hands slowly, her mascara smudged, her voice hoarse. "Mom, please." But I stood, gathering my purse. "Respect first, then maybe forgiveness. Until then, I have nothing more to say." Clara rose with me, her hand steady on my arm. Harrington collected the papers, sealing them with a final stamp that echoed through the room like thunder. As I walked out of the office into the cold winter air, the sun broke weakly through the clouds. I inhaled deeply, the air sharp but clean. Behind me, Natalie's voice rose in muffled cries, but I didn't turn back. For the first time, the world felt wide open, not like a cage, but like a horizon. And I knew Henry was right there with me, whispering the words that had carried me here. Never let them take your dignity. And I hadn't. The weeks after that meeting unfolded like the slow thaw of winter. Each day carried the weight of change, not only for me, but for the family I had left behind. Clara and I settled into a rhythm. Cups of tea in the morning, walks through the snowy streets, evenings by the fire. I began to feel human again, as though each breath was no longer taken on borrowed air. But for Natalie and Ethan, the unraveling had begun. Neighbors whispered. Clara's friend Mrs. Henson lived just 2 doors down from their house, and she never missed a detail. "They've started selling things," she told Clara over the phone one afternoon, her voice tinged with both pity and gossip. The dining table, the armchairs, even some of the jewelry. I saw Ethan loading boxes into his car at dawn. Looked like half the living room. I listened quietly, my tea cooling in my hand. Furniture, jewelry, pieces of their carefully curated image. Pieces they had once flaunted as proof of success, even though I had funded half of it. Now it was all unraveling. The truth arrived more directly when I opened my email a week later. A notification from an online auction site caught my eye. My pulse quickened as I clicked the link. And there it was, staring back at me on the screen. The pearl necklace I had given Natalie for her 35th birthday. A gift I had chosen carefully, with pride and love. Listed for $150. I sat back in my chair, a bitter taste in my mouth. What had once been a symbol of a mother's devotion was now reduced to a bargain, thrown onto the digital marketplace like any trinket. Not because it lacked value, but because Natalie had stripped it of meaning herself. I printed the page and folded it into the cedar chest where I kept Henry's letters, not as a reminder of loss, but as a record of truth. Proof of how easily greed consumes what love once built. Clara noticed my silence. "Does it hurt?" she asked gently. "Yes," I admitted, "but it also frees me, because now I see clearly, nothing I gave them was ever enough, and nothing I take back can be stolen again." Days turned into weeks. Word spread that Natalie and Ethan had moved out of the house, the mortgage unpaid, the bank reclaiming what I had once helped secure. They found a cramped apartment on the far side of town, cheaper but suffocating. No grand dining table, no glittering chandelier, no space to impress guests, just peeling wallpaper and the echo of what they had squandered. I saw them once, by chance. Clara and I were driving back from the market when I spotted Natalie walking along the sidewalk, her coat buttoned tight against the wind. She carried 2 heavy grocery bags, her posture slumped, her face pale. Ethan trailed behind her, muttering, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. For a moment, I almost asked Clara to stop the car. Almost. But then I remembered her words that night at Clara's driveway, dragging Sophie by the arm, shouting about bills, about suffering. Not once had she said sorry. Not once had she admitted what she had done. I stayed silent. We drove past. That evening, alone in Clara's guest room, I stared at the photo of Sophie and Liam I had carried with me. Their little smiles reminded me why I had endured everything, why I had taken the stand I did. For them, I thought, for the day they would know the truth. I heard whispers of how Ethan had begun taking odd jobs, painting houses, shoveling driveways, his pride shredded, his anger louder than ever. Neighbors said his shouting carried through the thin walls of the apartment. Natalie, once polished and perfectly composed, now avoided old friends at the market. Her eyes darted, her smile cracked. But it was the children I thought of most. Sophie and Liam, pulled into a smaller world they never chose. I wondered if Sophie still remembered that night in Clara's driveway, her wide eyes staring up at me as I spoke of Maplewood. I wondered if Liam still thought about the cookie he had tried to share. Clara caught me once, holding their picture, tears in my eyes. She touched my shoulder softly. "They'll grow. They'll see. Children don't forget who really loved them." I nodded, swallowing the ache. "I just pray the damage isn't too deep." One night, unable to sleep, I walked to the cedar chest and opened it. Henry's letters lay neatly inside, his handwriting steady, his words alive with the kind of love that endures even after death. I placed the printed page of the pearl necklace listing on top. Proof of what had been lost, proof of what had been saved. And as I closed the lid, I felt no anger, no bitterness, only clarity. They had wanted to erase me. Instead, they had erased themselves. Life at Clara's house settled into a gentle rhythm. Morning sunlight streamed through lace curtains, birds sang from bare branches, and the sound of Clara humming in the kitchen reminded me that peace could still exist. After years of being treated as a burden, I began to feel human again, whole, respected, alive. Clara invited me to join her reading club at the senior center. At first I hesitated, embarrassed to sit among strangers. But when I walked into that bright room filled with laughter and chatter, something inside me softened. Women my age read aloud passages from novels, men debated newspaper articles, and the simple joy of community wrapped itself around me like a blanket. Soon, I found myself teaching, sewing lessons for children from struggling families, needle and thread passing between small fingers as eager eyes looked up to me. "Grandma Pat," they called me, though they weren't my blood. It warmed me in a way Natalie's icy words never could, and slowly, the ache began to fade. But I still thought of Sophie and Liam. Every night before bed, I touched the framed photo of them I had carried with me. I whispered a prayer that they were safe, that one day they would understand why I had walked away. Then one morning, Clara came in holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, her eyes curious. My hands trembled as I took it. The handwriting on the front was small, uneven, but familiar. Sophie. I sat down, clutching the letter to my chest before carefully opening it. Inside, written in a child's careful scrawl, were the words that undid me. "Grandma, I miss you. I don't know why Mom says bad things, but I know you love me. I'll never forget Christmas Eve. I'll keep the rabbit safe. Please don't forget me. Love, Sophie." Tears blurred the page. I pressed the paper to my lips, whispering, "I could never forget you." Clara sat beside me, her hand covering mine. "See? They know. Children always know." I nodded, my heart both breaking and healing at once. That letter was worth more than any necklace, any estate, any fortune. It was proof that love, real love, had survived. Later that week, I stood in front of the group at the senior center, reading aloud a passage from a book about resilience. My voice didn't shake. I looked around at the faces listening, nodding, smiling, and I realized I was no longer invisible. My story wasn't over. It was only beginning again. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly outside, I sat by the fire with Clara. I held Sophie's letter in my lap, the cedar chest at my side. The flames glowed, warm and steady, and I spoke aloud the words that had carried me here. "Respect is the only inheritance I demand. Money fades, but dignity remains." Clara raised her teacup in quiet agreement. "And you've claimed it back." I smiled, a deep, steady smile that reached places in me long neglected. Natalie and Ethan had lost everything they thought they controlled, but I had gained something far more valuable. The freedom to live on my own terms, the dignity Henry had begged me never to surrender, and the quiet love of a granddaughter who saw through lies. That Christmas Eve had nearly broken me, but in its ashes, I found myself again. And this time, I would never let go.